He asked for a DNA test to prove her wrong. It destroyed his life. He held the envelope in his trembling hands. The results that would prove he was right, that she had betrayed him, that the child wasn't his. But when he tore it open and read those 3 words, 99.9% match, it wasn't relief he felt. It was the first crack in a foundation that would crumble into dust. She stood across from him, 7 months pregnant, tears streaming down her face, and said the words that would haunt him forever. "You just killed us, Garrison. You just killed everything we were." And she was right. This is the true story of a man who demanded proof of his wife's faithfulness and discovered too late that some questions, once asked, destroy the very thing you're trying to protect. By the time he realized his mistake, the woman he loved had become a stranger. The family he wanted had turned to ashes, and the life he could have lived became nothing more than a ghost that haunted his empty house. This is a story about trust, about pride, about how one moment of doubt can detonate a lifetime of love. And I promise you, by the end of this, you'll understand why some words can never be taken back. Stay with me. Welcome to Cedar Drama. While you're here, don't just watch. If this story makes you feel something, hit that subscribe button. And I need you to do something else. Comment below and tell me, have you ever asked a question you wished you could take back? Because this story will show you exactly what happens when you can't. Let me tell you about Garrison Holloway. 6'2", broad shoulders. The kind of man who wore tailored suits like armor and walked into rooms like he owned them. At 34, he was a senior architect at Fleming & Associates, one of the most prestigious firms in Charleston, South Carolina. He designed buildings that touched the sky, structures that would outlive him by centuries. He was a man who built things meant to last forever, which makes it almost unbearable that he couldn't keep his own marriage from collapsing. Sable Winters was everything Garrison wasn't. Where he was rigid, she was fluid. Where he calculated, she created. At 31, she was a freelance graphic designer who worked from their sun-drenched home office, bringing brands to life with colors and concepts that seemed to flow from her fingertips like magic. She had honey-colored skin that glowed in the southern sun, eyes the color of warm amber, and a laugh that could make even Garrison, with all his seriousness, forget about blueprints and budgets and just live in the moment. They met 6 years ago at an art gallery opening. Garrison had been dragged there by a colleague who insisted he needed to, and I quote, develop some culture beyond concrete and steel. He'd been standing in front of an abstract painting, frowning at the chaos of colors, when a voice beside him said, "You're looking at it wrong." He'd turned to find Sable, wearing a yellow sundress and a knowing smile. "Excuse me," he'd said, slightly offended. "You're trying to make sense of it," she'd explained, stepping closer to the canvas. "But chaos isn't meant to make sense. It's meant to make you feel." "And what exactly should I be feeling?" he'd asked, half mocking, half genuinely curious. She'd tilted her head, studying both him and the painting. "Loss," she'd said softly. "The artist lost someone. This painting is grief trying to find shape. And the yellow here," she'd pointed to a small burst of color in the corner. "That's hope. Tiny, almost crushed, but still there." Garrison had looked at the painting again and suddenly saw it. The anguish in the red slashes, the despair in the dark blues, the stubborn little spark of yellow fighting to survive. "How did you see that?" he'd asked, genuinely amazed. "Because I pay attention to things people try to hide," she'd replied, meeting his eyes. And just like that, he was gone, completely undone by this woman who saw the world in ways he never could. They were married 14 months later, in a small ceremony overlooking the Charleston harbor. Garrison's family had attended, but their smiles were tight, polite. His mother, Cordelia Holloway, had worn black to the wedding. Not navy, not dark purple, black, like she was mourning. Garrison's father had passed away years earlier, leaving Cordelia as the matriarch of the Holloway family. And Cordelia had very specific ideas about who was suitable for her son. Sable Winters, the daughter of a single mother who worked 3 jobs to raise her, did not meet Cordelia's standards. "She's lovely, Garrison," Cordelia had said the night before the wedding, sipping wine in her palatial home on Battery Street. "But darling, do you really think she understands our world? Our expectations." "She understands me," Garrison had replied firmly. "That's all that matters." Cordelia had smiled that thin smile of hers, the one that never reached her eyes. "Of course, darling, of course." The first 3 years of marriage were beautiful. They bought a historic house in the old village of Mount Pleasant. Sable filled it with light and art and laughter. Garrison built her a custom office with floor-to-ceiling windows. They traveled. They fought occasionally, always made up. They talked about having children someday. Not yet, but someday. Their house became a sanctuary. Sable would work during the day, meeting with clients over video calls, designing logos and brand identities for small businesses across the Southeast. Garrison would come home to the smell of whatever new recipe she was experimenting with. She wasn't a great cook, but she tried, and he loved her for trying. On weekends, they'd walk through the historic district, holding hands, stopping at farmers markets and antique shops. Sable would find beauty in the most ordinary things. A rusted gate, a crooked shutter, the way light hit old brick. "Look at that," she'd say, pointing to some detail he'd walked past 100 times. "Isn't it perfect?" And Garrison, who spent his days thinking about structural integrity and building codes, would see what she saw. The poetry in imperfection, the history in decay, the romance in survival. "You make me see things differently," he'd told her once, lying in bed on a lazy Sunday morning. "Good," she'd replied, tracing patterns on his chest. "Because you were seeing the world in black and white. I'm just adding color." Those were the golden years. Before the poison, before the doubt, before Cordelia started her campaign. But even then, there were signs. Small moments that Garrison ignored because he was happy, too happy to notice the cracks forming in the foundation. Like the time Cordelia stopped by unannounced and found Sable in the garden, dirt under her nails, hair tied up in a messy knot, wearing old jeans and one of Garrison's college t-shirts. "Goodness, Sable," Cordelia had said, her voice dripping with false concern. "You look exhausted. Is everything all right?" "I'm planting tomatoes," Sable had replied, smiling. "Want to help?" Cordelia had recoiled like Sable had offered her a snake. "I don't do manual labor, dear. That's what gardeners are for." "I like getting my hands dirty," Sable had said. "Makes me feel connected to something real." "How quaint," Cordelia had replied. Then she'd turned to Garrison, who'd just come outside. "Darling, doesn't it bother you that your wife looks like a farmhand?" "She looks beautiful," Garrison had said firmly. But he'd noticed the way his mother's eyes narrowed, the way she looked at Sable like she was a problem to be solved. Or the time they'd hosted Thanksgiving dinner. Sable had cooked for 2 days, turkey, dressing, 3 kinds of pie. She'd set a beautiful table with candles and autumn leaves. She'd wanted everything perfect for Garrison's family. Cordelia had arrived with her sister, Garrison's aunt Margot, and his cousin Fletcher. They'd walked through the house like they were touring a museum, polite, distant, judging. The turkey was slightly dry. Cordelia had mentioned it, twice. The pie crust was store-bought. Margot had noticed. The wine wasn't from the vineyard the Holloways preferred. Fletcher had brought his own bottle. And through it all, Sable had smiled, tried harder, ignored the small cuts that were meant to bleed her slowly. After they'd left, Garrison had found her in the kitchen, washing dishes with tears streaming down her face. "Hey," he'd said softly, taking the plate from her hands. "What's wrong?" "I tried so hard," she'd whispered. "And it still wasn't good enough for them." "You're good enough for me," he'd said, pulling her close. "That's all that matters." But even as he'd said it, he'd felt the seed of doubt. The tiny whisper that said, maybe my family sees something I don't. Maybe they know something I'm missing. He'd pushed the thought away, blamed his mother's snobbery, his family's elitism, but the seed was planted. In year 4, Sable landed her biggest client, a tech startup in Atlanta that wanted a complete rebrand. It was a 6-month project worth more than she'd made in the previous 2 years combined. She was thrilled, energized, working 12-hour days. She's very dedicated, Cordelia had remarked during one of her increasingly frequent visits. Almost obsessive, wouldn't you say? She's passionate about her work, Garrison had defended. Of course, Cordelia had agreed. But darling, she's alone in that office so many hours, on all those video calls with people you've never met. Doesn't that concern you? Why would it concern me? Because you're a trusting man, Garrison. Perhaps too trusting. I'm just saying, it's easy to hide things behind a computer screen. Mom, that's ridiculous. Is it? I saw her having coffee with a man last week. Downtown, they seemed very comfortable with each other. That was probably Micah, her client from the brewery project. Probably, Cordelia had echoed. But you don't know for certain, do you? And there it was again, the seed growing, fed by innuendo, watered by suggestion. Garrison started paying more attention, noticed things he'd never noticed before, the way Sable smiled when certain texts came through, the way she sometimes took calls in another room, the way she'd close her laptop quickly when he entered her office. None of it meant anything. But to a mind being slowly poisoned, everything became evidence. Then came the pregnancy. Year 5, month 3. Sable had suspected for a week before she took the test. She'd been tired, nauseous. Her body felt different. When the little pink lines appeared, she'd sat on the bathroom floor and cried. Happy tears, scared tears, overwhelmed tears. She'd planned how to tell Garrison, bought a tiny pair of sneakers, put them in a box, wrapped it. That evening, when he'd come home from work, she'd handed him the box with shaking hands. What's this? He'd asked, smiling. Open it. He'd unwrapped it slowly, lifted the lid, stared at the tiny shoes. Sable, are these? We're having a baby, she'd whispered. And Garrison had dropped the box and lifted her off the ground, spinning her around their kitchen. Both of them laughing and crying and holding each other like they could create their own world where nothing bad could ever touch them. A baby, he'd kept saying. We're having a baby. They'd made love that night with a tenderness that felt sacred, building something, creating life, becoming more than just husband and wife, becoming parents. But the next morning, when Garrison called his mother to share the news, everything changed. How wonderful, Cordelia had said. Her voice was strange, controlled. I assume you're both very certain about the timing. What do you mean? Garrison had asked. Well, darling, you work such long hours, and Sable is home alone so much. I just hope, Cordelia had paused delicately. I hope you're both on the same page about this pregnancy. Mom, what are you implying? Nothing, dear. Nothing at all. I'm just saying that in my day, a man knew his child was his because his wife was above reproach. But times have changed, haven't they? I'm sure Sable is completely faithful. I'm just saying, certainty is a gift, and you deserve that gift. Garrison had hung up, disturbed, angry, but also deep in a place he was ashamed to acknowledge, uncertain. And that uncertainty, that tiny crack in his trust, would grow over the next months until it swallowed everything whole. If you're watching this right now and you're thinking, why didn't he just trust his wife? Let me tell you something. Doubt doesn't arrive like a storm. It comes like fog. Slow. Creeping. So gradual, you don't even notice it until you can't see 3 feet in front of you anymore. And by then, you're lost, completely turned around. And the people you love become strangers in the mist. That's what happened to Garrison Holloway. And if you're not careful, it could happen to you too. So before we go further, I need you to do something. Hit that subscribe button, not for me, for yourself. Because the lessons in this story might save your relationship, your marriage, your family. And comment below. Tell me, has anyone ever planted doubt in your mind about someone you love? Because recognizing the poison is the first step to stopping it. Now let's continue. The pregnancy should have been the happiest time of their lives. Sable glowed. Her body changed in beautiful ways, curves where there had been angles, a fullness that made her even more radiant. She'd spend hours with her hands on her belly, talking to the baby, singing softly, reading children's books out loud. Garrison would watch her and feel his heart expand. This was his wife, the mother of his child, the woman he'd chosen above all others. But Cordelia's words echoed, "Certainty is a gift, and you deserve that gift." At 3 months, they went to their first ultrasound together. Sable gripped Garrison's hand as the technician moved the wand across her belly. And then, there it was. A tiny flickering heartbeat. The sound filled the room. "That's your baby," the technician said, smiling. Sable had tears streaming down her face. "Look, Garrison, look at our baby." And Garrison looked, felt overwhelmed, felt joy, felt terror. Because somewhere in the back of his mind, a voice whispered, "Are you sure it's yours?" He'd hated himself for thinking it, pushed it down, forced a smile, held Sable's hand tighter. "She's perfect," he'd said. "She? You think it's a girl?" Sable had asked. "I know it is." And Sable had laughed, that beautiful laugh he'd fallen in love with 6 years ago. "You're going to be such a good dad." Except he wasn't. Not yet. Because good fathers don't question. Good fathers don't doubt. Good fathers trust the women who carry their children. But Garrison had stopped being a good father the moment he let his mother's poison take root. Cordelia increased her visits. Now she came twice a week, always with some excuse, always with some small comment that seemed harmless, but wasn't. "You're showing early," Cordelia remarked when Sable was 4 months along. "Are you sure about your due date?" "That's what the doctor said," Sable had replied. "Doctors can be wrong, dear, especially if conception happened earlier than you remember." Sable had looked confused. Why would conception have happened earlier? "I'm just saying, memories can be unreliable." "Especially if there were." Cordelia had paused delicately. "Multiple possibilities." Sable's face had gone pale. "Cordelia, are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting?" "I'm not suggesting anything," Cordelia had said with false innocence. "I'm simply saying that babies come when they come, and sometimes timing can be surprising." After Cordelia left, Sable had confronted Garrison in his study. "Your mother just implied that I might not know who my baby's father is," she'd said. Her voice was shaking with anger. "She didn't say that," Garrison had replied, not looking up from his laptop. "She absolutely said that. She questioned my due date, suggested there might be multiple possibilities. Garrison, she's calling me a liar, and you're sitting here acting like it's nothing. You're overreacting." Sable had stared at him. "When did you start defending her over me?" "I'm not defending anyone. I'm just saying my mother is old-fashioned. She thinks differently. It doesn't mean anything. It means she doesn't respect me, and apparently neither do you." "That's not fair, Sable." "Isn't it? Because you didn't defend me just now. You told me I was overreacting, like my feelings don't matter, like her insults are acceptable because she's your mother." Garrison had finally looked up. "What do you want me to do?" "Cut her out of our lives. She's my mother, Sable, my only living parent. And I'm your wife, the woman carrying your child. Doesn't that mean anything?" "Of course it does." "Then prove it," Sable had said. "Tell her to stop. Tell her that if she can't respect me, she's not welcome in our home." But Garrison hadn't. Because some part of him, the part being slowly consumed by doubt, wondered if maybe his mother had a point. Maybe the timing was off. maybe Sable was hiding something. He'd started calculating, trying to remember exactly when they'd conceived. But weeks blurred together, dates overlapped, and the more he thought about it, the less certain he became. At 5 months, Sable had a work crisis. Her biggest client was unhappy with the initial designs. She'd spent 3 days locked in her office, redesigning everything, barely sleeping, surviving on coffee and crackers. Garrison had brought her dinner one evening, found her on a video call with Micah, her brewery client. They were laughing about something. Sable looked more relaxed than she'd been in days. "No, you can't put a hop plant in the logo," she was saying. "It's cliché. Trust me on this." "But hops are literally what we make beer from," Micah had protested. "And Starbucks doesn't put a coffee bean in their logo. Originality, Micah. That's what separates good branding from great branding." More laughter. Easy. Comfortable. Garrison had set the plate down loudly. Sable had jumped. "Oh. Hey, babe." She'd smiled at him. "This is Micah. Micah, this is my husband, Garrison." "Nice to meet you, man," Micah had said from the screen. "Your wife is a genius. Stubborn, but a genius." "Thanks," Garrison had said coldly. After the call ended, Sable had turned to him. "What's wrong?" "Nothing. You're doing that thing where you say nothing, but your face says everything. I just think you're very comfortable with that guy." "Micah, we've been working together for almost a year. Of course I'm comfortable with him. Maybe too comfortable." Sable had stood up, her hand on her belly. "Are you serious right now? I'm 5 months pregnant, exhausted, trying to save a client relationship. And you're implying what, exactly?" "I'm not implying anything." "Yes, you are. You're standing there with that look on your face like I've done something wrong. And I'm tired of it, Garrison. I'm tired of feeling like I have to prove myself to you. To your mother. To everyone. You don't have to prove anything. Don't I? Because it feels like I do. It feels like no matter what I do, it's not enough. I work too much. I'm too friendly with clients. I don't include you enough. What do you want from me?" "I want honesty," Garrison had said, and immediately regretted it. Sable's face had crumpled. "Honesty. You want honesty. I have been honest with you every single day of our marriage. Every single day, Garrison. And you're still looking at me like I'm lying." She'd walked out of her office, locked herself in their bedroom, and Garrison had stood there, holding a plate of cold pasta, wondering when he'd become the kind of man who made his pregnant wife cry. But instead of apologizing, instead of recognizing the poison for what it was, he'd called his mother. "Things are tense with Sable," he'd admitted. "Of course they are, darling," Cordelia had said. "Pregnancy is stressful, especially when there are underlying issues." "What underlying issues?" "The issues you keep ignoring. Her secrecy, her defensiveness, the way she reacts when you ask simple questions. Guilty people deflect, Garrison. They turn things around. Make you feel like you're the problem." "But what if I am the problem? What if I'm just being paranoid? Or what if your instincts are trying to tell you something and you're too afraid to listen? There's a simple way to know for certain, Garrison. A test. Quick. Painless. And then you'll have peace of mind." "I can't ask her for that." "Why not? If she has nothing to hide, she'll agree. And if she refuses," Cordelia had let the implication hang in the air. "Well, that tells you everything, doesn't it?" Garrison had hung up, sat in his study until midnight, and made a decision that would destroy everything. At 6 months pregnant, Sable started having trouble sleeping. Her back ached. The baby kicked constantly. She'd wake up at 3 in the morning and wander the house, rubbing her belly, humming softly. Garrison would wake to find her side of the bed empty, would go looking for her, would find her in the nursery they'd been preparing, sitting in the rocking chair, staring at the empty crib. Can't sleep, he'd ask. She won't stop moving, Sable would say, smiling. I think she's practicing gymnastics. Garrison would kneel beside the chair, put his hand on Sable's belly, feel the tiny kicks against his palm, and for a moment, the doubt would disappear. This was real. This was his family. But then morning would come. Cordelia would call, and the poison would spread again. At 7 months, Garrison bought the DNA test, ordered it online, had it delivered to his office, kept it in his desk drawer for 2 weeks, staring at it during lunch breaks, arguing with himself. This is crazy. Sable loves you. Sable has never lied to you. But what if she has? What if everyone else sees something you're blind to? You'll destroy your marriage, or you'll save yourself from a lifetime of uncertainty. Back and forth, day after day, until finally, one evening, he put the box in his jacket pocket and drove home. Sable had been cooking dinner, stirring pasta sauce, humming along to music playing from her phone. 7 months pregnant, radiant despite her exhaustion, happy despite the tension that had been building between them for months. Garrison had walked in, set his briefcase down, and pulled the DNA test kit from his jacket pocket. He'd placed it on the counter beside the stove. And in that moment, with that one action, he detonated his entire life. Sable had looked at the box, then at him, then back at the box. The pasta sauce continued to bubble on the stove. The music continued to play, but everything else had stopped. "What is this?" she'd asked. Her voice was calm. Too calm. "You know what it is." "No, Garrison, I really don't. So please, explain to me what you just put next to my marinara sauce." "It's a paternity test." Sable had turned off the stove, moved the pot, wiped her hands on a towel. All of her movements were slow, deliberate. When she finally looked at him, her eyes were different. Something had changed in them, something fundamental. "And why?" she'd asked, still in that terrifyingly calm voice. "Do we need a paternity test?" "Because I need to know." "Know what, exactly?" "That the baby is mine." The silence that followed was suffocating. Somewhere outside, a dog barked, a car drove past, normal sounds in a world that had just become unrecognizable. When Sable finally spoke, her voice was shaking. "Are you asking me what I think you're asking me?" "I'm asking for certainty." "Certainty." Sable had laughed, but it wasn't a real laugh. It was the sound of something breaking. "You want certainty? After 6 years of marriage, after building a life together, after every promise we've made, you want me to prove that I haven't betrayed you. It's just a test, Sable, a simple test, and then we'll know for sure." "We already know for sure, Garrison. At least I thought we did. But apparently, you've decided that I'm a liar, a cheater, someone who would carry another man's child and trick you into raising it." "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to. You brought that box into our home. You looked at me, pregnant with our daughter, and decided I needed to prove my faithfulness. Do you have any idea what you just did?" "I'm protecting myself." "From what?" Sable's voice had risen. "From the woman who loves you. The woman who has been faithful to you every single day. The woman who is carrying your child and can feel her kicking right now. You need protection from me. This isn't about you." Which was possibly the stupidest thing Garrison could have said. Not about me. Sable had grabbed the test kit and thrown it across the kitchen. It hit the wall and fell to the floor. "This is exactly about me. You are accusing me of the worst betrayal imaginable. And you're doing it because why, Garrison? Why now? What have I done to deserve this? You're always on your phone, always talking to clients I don't know, always busy with projects that don't include me. Because I have a career. Because I work. My God, Garrison, this is insane." "Is it? Because my mother said..." And that was when Sable's face changed. Everything clicked into place. Her eyes widened, then narrowed. Her mouth opened, then closed. When she spoke again, her voice was deadly quiet. Your mother. Of course, Cordelia. She's been whispering in your ear, hasn't she? Planting doubts, poisoning you against me, and you just let her. She's concerned. She's controlling. She's manipulative, and she has never approved of me. Not once, not ever. And now she's convinced you that I'm unfaithful, and you actually believe her. I just want to be sure. Then our marriage is already over. What? Sable had picked up her phone and her keys. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold them. Because if you can't trust me, if you need a test to prove that I'm telling the truth, then we have nothing, Garrison. Trust is the foundation. It's everything. And you just took a sledgehammer to it. Where are you going? Garrison had asked. He was starting to panic now, seeing the reality of what he'd done. Away from you. Don't leave. We need to talk about this. There's nothing to talk about. You made your choice when you bought that test. Now I'm making mine. Sable, please. But she'd walked out, got in her car, driven away, 7 months pregnant, crying so hard she could barely see the road. She'd driven to her best friend Rena's house on the other side of town. Rena had opened the door, taken one look at Sable's face, and pulled her inside. What happened? He wants a paternity test, Sable had said. And then she'd collapsed onto Rena's couch, sobbing. He what? Garrison. He thinks, Sable could barely get the words out, he thinks the baby might not be his. Rena had gone very still, very quiet. That's impossible. You've never even looked at another man. I know. So why would he think? His mother. Cordelia has been poisoning him against me for months, maybe years, and he finally believes her. Oh, Sable. And Rena had held her while she cried, while she grieved. Not for the marriage that was ending, but for the man she'd thought she married, the man who would have trusted her, the man who would have defended her against anyone, even his own mother. That man, Sable realized, had never really existed. Or, if he had, Cordelia had killed him slowly, replacing him with someone suspicious and weak and cruel. Meanwhile, Garrison had been left standing in their kitchen, looking at the shattered test kit on the floor, wondering how everything had gone so wrong, so fast. But he didn't pick up the phone to apologize. He didn't drive to Rena's house to beg forgiveness. Instead, he called his mother. I told her about the test, he'd said when Cordelia answered. And she left. She's furious. Cordelia had sighed. Of course she's furious, darling. Guilty people always are. What if she's not guilty, Mom? What if I just destroyed my marriage for nothing? Then the test will prove that, and she'll come back. And if she refuses to take it, Cordelia had paused meaningfully, well, that tells you everything you need to know, doesn't it? A woman with nothing to hide wouldn't run away. She'd take the test immediately to clear her name. Garrison had hung up feeling worse, not better. He'd spent the night alone in their big house, unable to sleep, unable to eat, replaying Sable's face over and over, the devastation in her eyes, the way her voice had broken when she said, "You just killed us." At 2 a.m, his phone had buzzed. A text from Sable. I'll take your test, Garrison. Not because I have anything to prove, but because I want you to see exactly what you've done. I want you to hold that paper in your hands and know that you destroyed our marriage over nothing. We'll do it tomorrow. And then I want you to live with what you've done. Garrison had stared at that message for an hour. He should have felt relieved. She was agreeing to the test. She was going to prove her innocence. But all he felt was sick, because even if the test came back positive, even if it proved he was the father, something had already broken between them, something that couldn't be fixed with a piece of paper. The test was administered at a private clinic the next day. A sterile room, cold fluorescent lights, a nurse who didn't make eye contact, She swabbed the inside of Garrison's cheek, then performed a non-invasive prenatal paternity test on Sable, drawing blood that would be analyzed for fetal DNA. The whole thing took 20 minutes. They sat in separate chairs, didn't speak, didn't look at each other. Sable kept her hand on her belly the entire time, as if protecting their daughter from the poison in that room. When it was done, Sable had stood up and walked out without a word. No goodbye, no see you later, nothing. Garrison had watched her go. Wanted to call out to her. Wanted to say he was sorry, but his pride, his terrible pride, kept him silent. Results would be ready in 3 days. Garrison had gone to work, gone through the motions, met with clients, reviewed blueprints, presented designs, but his mind was elsewhere, with his wife, who wasn't answering his calls, who changed her relationship status on social media from married to it's complicated, who was staying at Rena's and refusing to come home. His colleagues noticed, asked if he was okay. He'd lied, said he was fine, just tired, just stressed about a project. But his boss, a shrewd woman named Delphine Cross, had pulled him aside on the second day. "Whatever's going on in your personal life, fix it," she'd said, "because you're barely present, and this firm doesn't pay you to be distracted. I'm handling it. Are you? Because you look like a man falling apart. And Garrison, I'm going to tell you something my father told me when I almost lost my husband. Pride is expensive. Make sure you can afford the cost." She'd walked away, leaving him with those words. Pride is expensive. Make sure you can afford the cost. On the third day, the email arrived. Results were ready. Garrison had left work immediately, driven to the clinic, picked up the sealed envelope. His hands had been shaking so badly the receptionist had asked if he needed to sit down. "No," he'd said. "I'm fine." But he wasn't fine. He was terrified, not of what the test would say, but of what came after. He'd sat in his car in the clinic parking lot, holding the answer to the question that had cost him everything. The sun was setting. The sky was turning pink and orange. Somewhere, people were going home to families who trusted each other, to partners who didn't need proof, to lives that weren't built on doubt. Garrison tore open the envelope, unfolded the paper, and read the words that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Probability of paternity, 99.9%. Garrison Holloway is not excluded as the biological father. In simpler terms, he was the father. Of course he was the father. Sable had never lied, never cheated, never given him any real reason to doubt her, and he'd accused her anyway. He'd looked at the woman carrying his child and demanded proof of her faithfulness. And now he held that proof in his trembling hands. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like ashes. He'd driven to Rena's house, knocked on the door. His heart was pounding. He had the test results in his hand. He had an apology on his lips. He had hope, foolish hope, that maybe they could fix this. Rena had answered, her face hard. "She's not ready to see you." "I have the results. I need to show her. I need to apologize." "I don't care if you have the cure for cancer." She said she's not ready. "Please, Rena, I need to make this right." Rena had laughed, but it was bitter. "Mean. Make it right. Garrison, do you have any idea what you've done to her? She cries herself to sleep every night. She barely eats. She sits in my guest room staring at the wall, wondering how the man she loved could think so little of her. But sure, come on in. Let's see if your apology can fix a broken heart." She'd stepped aside. Garrison had walked into the small living room, and there was Sable, sitting on the couch, wearing one of Rena's oversized sweatshirts, her hand on her belly. She looked up when Garrison entered. Her eyes were empty, hollow, like someone had reached inside and taken everything that made her Sable. "I got the results," Garrison had said. He'd held up the paper like a peace offering, like proof of his mistake. 99.9%. I'm the father. "Congratulations," Sable had said flatly. "You must be so relieved." "You were right, and I was wrong," Garrison continued. "I should never have doubted you. I should never have asked for that test. I'm so sorry, Sable. I'm so incredibly sorry." Sable had stood up slowly, walked over to him, taken the paper from his hands. She'd read it carefully. Her face hadn't changed. No relief, no vindication, nothing. "Do you know what this paper means, Garrison?" she'd asked. "It means I was telling the truth." "No," Sable had said, her voice breaking. "It means you'll never trust me again. Even now, even with proof, you'll always wonder. Every time I'm late coming home. Every time I smile at another man. Every time we fight, you'll remember that you once thought I was capable of this. And I'll remember that you looked at me, pregnant and vulnerable and completely in love with you, and you saw a stranger, someone who needed to be verified, tested, proven." "That's not true," Garrison had protested. "Isn't it?" Sable had handed the paper back. "Then tell me, Garrison, right now, in this moment, do you trust me, completely, without reservation, the way you did on our wedding day?" Garrison had opened his mouth, but the words wouldn't come, because he didn't know. The doubt had burrowed too deep. Even with proof in his hands, even knowing he was the father, a small part of him still wondered, still questioned, and Sable saw it in his eyes. "That's what I thought," she'd said quietly. "Sable, I love you. I know, and I love you too, but love isn't enough when the foundation is gone. Our daughter," Sable had put her hand on her belly, "deserves better than parents who look at each other and see betrayal and regret. She deserves better than a mother who feels like she has to prove herself every day. And honestly, I deserve better too." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I want a divorce." "No. Sable, please. We can go to counseling. We can work through this. We can. Some things can't be fixed, Garrison. Trust isn't a bone that heals. It's a mirror. And you shattered it. And even if we glued all the pieces back together, we'd still see the cracks every single day. I can't live like that. And I won't put our daughter through it. Please don't do this." Sable had walked past him toward the door. "I'll have my lawyer contact yours. We can work out custody arrangements. Shared time. I won't keep her from you. You're her father. That paper proves it." The bitterness in her voice had cut deeper than any knife. "But Garrison," she turned back to look at him one last time, "don't ever ask me to prove myself to you again. Because I'm done. I'm done defending myself. I'm done explaining myself. I'm done being guilty until proven innocent in my own marriage. I'm just done." She'd opened the door, walked out into the evening, left Garrison standing in Rena's living room, holding the test results that were supposed to give him certainty. Instead, they'd given him the exact moment his life fell apart, and there was no going back, no fixing it, no undoing the question that never should have been asked. Rena had stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching him with disgust. "You should leave now," she'd said. "Rena, You broke her, Garrison. You took the strongest, most loving woman I've ever known, and you broke her. For what? Because your manipulative mother convinced you to doubt the one person who never doubted you. Get out, and don't come back unless Sable asks for you, which, if I know her, she never will." Garrison had walked to his car in a daze, sat behind the wheel, looked at the test results one more time. 99.9%. He was the father. He'd been right to trust Sable all along. But he hadn't trusted her. And now she was gone. And the life they'd built together was gone. And the family they should have been was gone. All because he'd asked a question he could never take back. The divorce proceedings began 1 month later. Sable was 8 months pregnant now, moving slowly, her belly enormous, her face tired but determined. She'd hired Octavia Brand, one of the toughest family law attorneys in Charleston, a woman known for destroying men who underestimated her. A woman who took one look at Sable's case and said, "We're going to make him understand exactly what he threw away." Garrison had hired Preston Locke, an old family friend recommended by his mother. Preston was competent, professional, but he'd taken Garrison aside after their first meeting and said something that should have been a warning. "You're not going to win this, Garrison. Not in the way you want to. The best thing you can do is settle. Give her what she wants. Apologize publicly if you have to. Because if this goes to trial, the judge is going to see a man who psychologically abused his pregnant wife, and you're going to lose badly." "I didn't abuse her," Garrison had protested. "I made a mistake." "You accused her of infidelity without evidence. You demanded she prove her faithfulness through medical testing. You caused her severe emotional distress during a high-risk time in her pregnancy." Preston had ticked off each point on his fingers. "That's psychological abuse, Garrison, and a family court judge isn't going to see it any other way. So what do? You settle. You agree to whatever custody arrangement she wants. You pay whatever support she asks for, and you spend the rest of your life trying to be a good father to make up for being a terrible husband." But Garrison's pride wouldn't let him settle. He'd convinced himself that if he just explained everything to a judge, if he just showed how his mother had manipulated him, the court would see that he was a victim too, that he'd been poisoned against his wife, that he deserved understanding and shared custody and a second chance. He was so incredibly wrong. The first mediation session was brutal. They sat across from each other at a long conference table in a sterile office downtown. Lawyers on either side, a mediator at the head. Garrison tried to make eye contact with Sable. She looked right through him, like he was glass, like he was nothing. "My client is seeking primary physical custody," Octavia had announced, her voice crisp and professional, "with supervised visitation for Mr. Holloway until the child reaches age 3, at which point we'll reevaluate based on his behavior and the child's needs." "Supervised visitation," Preston had sputtered. "On what grounds?" "On the grounds that Mr. Holloway has demonstrated severe lapses in judgment and a pattern of emotional abuse. He subjected his pregnant wife to unnecessary medical testing based on unfounded accusations. He created an environment of hostility and mistrust during a vulnerable time. My client has documented evidence of the emotional harm this caused." "That's ridiculous," Garrison had said. "I made a mistake. One mistake." "One mistake," Octavia had repeated, looking at him with cold eyes. "You demanded a paternity test, Mr. Holloway. You looked at your wife, 7 months pregnant with your child, and told her you didn't believe her. You didn't trust her. You needed scientific proof that she hadn't betrayed you. Do you have any idea what that does to a person? The psychological damage, the trauma." "I've apologized," Garrison said. "I've tried to make things right." "Have you?" Octavia opened a folder. "Because my client has text messages from you that say, and I quote, 'I only asked for the test because I needed to be sure.' That's not an apology, Mr. Holloway. That's a justification. You're still defending what you did." "Because my mother," Garrison started. "Your mother," Octavia interrupted, "is not party to this marriage. You're a grown man. You made a choice, and now you're facing the consequences of that choice." The mediation had devolved from there. They couldn't agree on anything. Custody, division of assets, who kept the house. Sable wanted to sell it. "Too many bad memories," she'd said through her lawyer. She couldn't live in a place where she'd been accused of betrayal in her own kitchen. Garrison wanted to keep it. It was their home, the place they'd built their life together, the place he still hoped, foolishly, they might return to. But Sable was done hoping, done waiting, done giving Garrison chances he didn't deserve. "My client also requests full financial disclosure," Octavia had said. "All bank accounts, All assets, all investments. We need to ensure Mr. Holloway hasn't been hiding money in preparation for this divorce. I haven't hidden anything, Garrison had protested. Then you won't mind providing the documentation, Octavia had replied smoothly. And that was when Garrison realized what was happening. Sable wasn't just divorcing him, she was protecting herself, making sure he couldn't hurt her again, financially, emotionally, in any way. She'd learned not to trust him, and the bitter irony was that he'd taught her that lesson himself. After the mediation, Garrison had tried to approach Sable in the parking garage. She'd been walking slowly to her car, one hand on her lower back, the other on her belly. She looked exhausted. Sable, wait, please, can we talk? She'd stopped, turned slowly. There's nothing to talk about, Garrison. I miss you. I miss us. There is no us anymore. There's you, and there's me, and soon there will be our daughter. But there's no us. You killed that when you bought that test. I was wrong. I know I was wrong, but can't you forgive me? Can't we try again? Sable had looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes were sad. Not angry anymore, just infinitely sad. Do you know what the worst part is, Garrison? It's not that you asked for the test. It's that even now, even after the results, you still don't fully trust me. I can see it in your eyes. Every time you look at me, there's a tiny part of you that still wonders. That's not true. It is true, and that's why we can't fix this. Because I'll spend the rest of my life trying to prove something to you that I should never have to prove. And I won't do that. I won't teach our daughter that love means constantly defending yourself, constantly proving your worth. I'd rather be alone. She'd gotten in her car and driven away, left Garrison standing in the concrete garage, surrounded by echoes and regret. That night, he'd gone to his mother's house, let himself in with the key she'd given him years ago, found Cordelia in her sitting room, drinking wine and reading a book. I hope you're happy, he'd said. His voice was raw, broken. Darling, what are you talking about? Cordelia had set down her book, her face the picture of innocent concern. Sable and I are getting divorced. Because of you. Because you poisoned me against her. Because you couldn't stand that I loved someone you didn't approve of. That's not fair, Garrison. I was only trying to protect you. Protect me. Garrison had laughed. It was a terrible sound. You destroyed me. You took the best thing in my life and you turned it to poison. And I let you. God help me. I let you. If your marriage was strong, nothing I said would have mattered. My marriage was strong. Until you spent years undermining it. Years planting doubt. Years making me question the woman who loved me. Garrison had walked closer. Why, Mom? Why did you do it? Cordelia had stood up, her face finally showing something real. Anger. Because she wasn't good enough for you. She came from nothing. Her mother was a waitress. She had no breeding, no class, no understanding of our world. You could have married anyone. Alexandra Pemberton was perfect for you. She came from old money. She understood society. But no, you had to marry that artist. That nobody. That nobody, Garrison said quietly, was the love of my life, and you took her from me. I did no such thing. You made your own choices. Because you manipulated me into making them, and now I've lost everything. My wife, my daughter, my family, everything. I hope you're satisfied. Garrison had turned to leave. Cordelia had called after him. You'll thank me one day, when you've found someone suitable, when you've moved on from this mistake. Garrison had stopped at the door. Don't call me, he'd said. Don't come to my house. Don't contact me at all. Because if I have to choose between you and any chance, however small, of being in my daughter's life, I choose her. I should have chosen Sable from the beginning, but I choose my daughter now. And that means you're out. Garrison, you're being dramatic. I'm being clear. You're toxic. You're poison. and I'm done drinking it. He'd left, blocked her number, blocked her on every platform, cut her out of his life completely. But it was too late. The damage was done. Cordelia had accomplished exactly what she'd set out to do. She destroyed his marriage, and in doing so, she destroyed him. 2 weeks before Sable's due date, Garrison received notice that the mediation had failed. They were going to trial. A family court judge would decide custody, would decide how much time Garrison got with his daughter, would decide what kind of father he was allowed to be. Preston had called him with the news. "I told you to settle," he'd said. There was no sympathy in his voice. "Now it's out of our hands." The trial was scheduled for 2 weeks after Sable's due date, assuming she delivered on time, assuming there were no complications. Garrison had wanted to call her, to wish her well, to tell her he'd be thinking of her during the delivery, but he didn't have the right anymore. He'd given up that right when he demanded proof of her faithfulness. Instead, he'd sent a text. "I hope everything goes smoothly with the delivery. Please let me know when she's born. I'd like to meet her as soon as you're comfortable with that." Sable had replied 3 hours later. "I'll let you know." That was all. 3 words. Cold, distant. The woman who used to send him paragraphs, who used to fill his phone with pictures and thoughts and jokes, now reduced to 3 words. Garrison had stared at that message for an hour. This was his life now, waiting for permission to meet his own daughter, waiting for scraps of information from a woman who used to tell him everything, waiting in the cold aftermath of his own terrible choices. Sable went into labor on a Tuesday morning. 3 days before her due date, she'd been at Rena's house, folding tiny baby clothes, when her water broke. Rena had driven her to the hospital, timing contractions, calling the doctor, doing all the things a birth partner does. All the things Garrison should have been doing. Sable had texted him from the hospital. "In labor. Baby coming soon." That was it. No details. No invitation to come. Just information. Garrison had stared at the message. His daughter was being born, right now. And he wasn't there. He'd driven to the hospital anyway, sat in the waiting room. Asked the nurses if they could tell Sable he was there, if she needed anything, if she'd allow him in the room. The nurse had gone to check. Came back 5 minutes later with a sympathetic smile. "I'm sorry. She said she has her support person with her. She's not allowing any other visitors right now. Can you tell her I'm here, that I'm waiting, that I want to meet our daughter as soon as possible? I'll let her know." Garrison had sat in that waiting room for 7 hours, drinking bad coffee, watching other families come and go, watching fathers pace nervously, watching grandmothers arrive with balloons and flowers, watching the joy he should have been experiencing happen all around him while he sat alone in a plastic chair. At 6:42 in the evening, the nurse had come back. "Congratulations," she'd said. "You have a daughter, 7 pounds, 4 ounces, 20 inches long. Both mom and baby are healthy. Can I see them?" The nurse had hesitated. "Let me check." Another 15 minutes, each one an eternity. Then the nurse returned. "Miss Winters said you can come back for 10 minutes, just to meet the baby. Then she needs to rest." Garrison had followed the nurse down the hallway. His heart was pounding. His hands were shaking. He was about to meet his daughter, the child he'd questioned, the child whose paternity he'd demanded proof of, the child who existed because of love that he'd destroyed. The nurse had stopped at a door. 10 minutes, she'd reminded him. "And please keep your voice down. Miss Winters has been through a difficult labor." Garrison had nodded, taken a deep breath, pushed open the door. Sable was in the bed, propped up on pillows, looking exhausted and radiant all at once. Her hair was sweaty, her face was pale, but she was glowing. And in her arms, wrapped in a pink blanket, was a tiny, perfect baby. Garrison had stopped breathing. "Come, meet your daughter," Sable had said quietly. Her voice was neutral, not warm, not cold, just factual. Garrison had walked slowly to the bed, looked down at the tiny face, and felt his entire world reorganize itself around this small person. She was beautiful, impossibly beautiful. She had Sable's nose, his chin, dark hair that stuck up in soft spikes, and when she opened her eyes, just for a moment, they were dark blue, unfocused, searching. "This is Lennox," Sable said. "Lennox Winters. Not Lennox Holloway. Lennox Winters." Another cut, another reminder of what he'd lost. "Can I hold her?" Garrison had whispered. Sable had hesitated. Then, slowly, she'd extended the bundle toward him. "Be careful with her head." Garrison had taken his daughter in his arms. She was so light, so fragile, so completely dependent. And looking down at her, feeling her warmth, smelling that newborn smell, something inside him shattered completely. He started crying. Not quiet tears, huge, racking sobs that shook his whole body. "I'm sorry," he'd choked out. "I'm so sorry, Lennox. I'm sorry I doubted you. I'm sorry I wasn't there when you were born. I'm sorry I've already failed you and you're only 4 hours old." "Garrison," Sable had said. Her voice had softened just slightly. "You need to pull yourself together. You're scaring her." But Garrison couldn't stop. 6 months of guilt, 6 months of regret, 6 months of knowing he destroyed everything good in his life. It all came pouring out. "I love her," he'd said. "I love her so much already. And I love you. I love you, Sable. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know I ruined everything. But please, please, let me be a father to her. Let me prove I can do better." Sable had looked at him, and for just a moment, her mask had slipped. He'd seen the pain underneath, the grief, the love that still existed but had nowhere to go. "You can be her father," Sable had said. "I would never keep her from you. But Garrison, you can't be my husband. That's over, and you need to accept it." "I can't." "You have to, because I've accepted it. I've grieved it. I've moved on, and you need to do the same. For Lennox's sake." Rena had knocked and entered then, bringing ice chips for Sable. She'd seen Garrison holding the baby and her face had hardened. "Time's up," she'd said. "Sable needs to rest." "Just a few more minutes," Garrison had pleaded. "No," Sable said. 10 minutes. "It's been 12. Give her the baby and go." Garrison had looked at Sable. She'd nodded. "I need to sleep, Garrison, and you need to leave." He'd handed Lennox back. His arms felt empty. His whole chest felt empty. "When can I see her again?" "We'll work out a visitation schedule. Through the lawyers." "Please don't do this. Please don't reduce me to scheduled visits. She's my daughter." "And she's my daughter too. And I'm the one who carried her, who went through labor without you, who will be getting up every 2 hours to feed her, who will be changing diapers and soothing her when she cries. You wanted certainty, Garrison. You wanted proof. Well, you got it. You're her father. But that doesn't mean you get unlimited access to my life. I'm not asking for access to your life. I'm asking to be a father. Then be one, on the schedule we agree to, like thousands of divorced parents do every day." Sable's voice had turned cold again. "You made this bed, Garrison. Now lie in it." He'd left the hospital room, walked past Rena, who'd watched him with contempt, walked back down the hallway, back to the waiting room, back to his car. He'd sat in the parking lot for an hour, crying, punching the steering wheel, screaming until his throat was raw. He'd held his daughter for 8 minutes. 8 minutes. And then she'd been taken away, and the next time he saw her would be determined by lawyers and courts and schedules. This was his life now. This was what he'd created when he'd bought that DNA test. 3 days later, Sable and Lennox went home to Rena's house, not to the home she'd shared with Garrison. That was being prepared for sale. All their memories packed into boxes, all their history reduced to a real estate listing. Garrison had received the visitation schedule from Octavia. 2 hours, twice a week, supervised by a court-approved monitor at a neutral location. Not his home, not Sable's temporary home, a sterile office with toys and cameras, and a stranger watching his every interaction with his daughter. The first supervised visit was the following Monday. Garrison had arrived 30 minutes early, bringing a stuffed elephant, a pink blanket, a children's book he'd already read 17 times, practicing for this moment. The supervisor, a kind-faced woman named Patrice, had explained the rules. No raising your voice, no leaving the room with the baby, no discussing the divorce or the mother. Just focus on bonding with your daughter. Garrison had nodded. Understood. He just wanted to hold her. Sable had arrived exactly on time, carrying Lennox in a car seat. She'd looked tired, beautiful, distant. She'd handed the car seat to Patrice without looking at Garrison. She just ate, so she should be happy for a while, Sable had said. I'll be back in 2 hours. Sable, wait, Garrison had started. 2 hours, Garrison. That's what we agreed to. She'd left, and Garrison had spent 2 precious hours with his daughter, holding her, talking to her, telling her about all the things he wanted to show her. The ocean, the stars, the old oak tree in his backyard. Lennox had looked at him with those unfocused newborn eyes, had gripped his finger with her tiny hand, had fallen asleep on his chest while he hummed a lullaby his own father had sung to him. And when the 2 hours were up, when Sable had returned to take her away, Garrison had felt a piece of his soul go with them. This happened twice a week. For 4 weeks, 8 visits, 16 hours total with his daughter in her first month of life. Other fathers got midnight feedings and diaper changes and endless hours of just being present. Garrison got supervised visits in a sterile room. The trial was scheduled for the end of the month. Garrison's last hope of getting more time with Lennox. His last chance to prove he could be a good father despite being a terrible husband. Preston had prepared him, warned him what to expect. The judge will ask about the DNA test, Preston had said, about why you requested it, about what evidence you had. And Garrison, you need to take full responsibility. No blaming your mother, no excusing your behavior. Just acknowledge what you did was wrong and explain how you've changed. But I haven't changed, Garrison had said quietly. I'm the same man. I just understand now what I lost. Then you'd better figure out how to articulate that in a way that doesn't make you sound like a self-pitying victim. Because that's exactly what Octavia will try to paint you as. The night before the trial, Garrison had stood in the nursery he'd prepared in his house, the house he'd kept, the house that was too big and too empty for just him. He'd painted the room pale yellow, bought a crib and a changing table and shelves full of books, created a space for a daughter who would only visit on a court-appointed schedule. He'd stood there, surrounded by all the things he'd bought for a child he barely knew, and understood something fundamental. He'd lost, not the trial. That hadn't happened yet, but the war, the fight for his family, for his marriage, for the life he'd imagined. He'd lost it all the moment he'd placed that DNA test kit on the kitchen counter. And no amount of supervised visits or child support payments or court orders would ever give him back what he'd thrown away. Before we continue to the trial and what comes after, I need you to understand something. This isn't just a story about a DNA test. It's about the moment when pride becomes more important than love. When outside voices become louder than your own heart. When you choose certainty over faith. And here's the hard truth. Once you make that choice, you can't unmake it. The question hangs in the air forever. So if you're watching this and thinking about your own relationships, ask yourself, are you listening to the right voices? Are you choosing trust or are you choosing fear? Hit that subscribe button if this story is making you think, and comment below. Tell me, what voice are you listening to in your life right now? The one that builds up or the one that tears down? Because the choice you make today determines the life you live tomorrow. Now let's see what happened when Garrison faced a judge who would decide his future. The courtroom was smaller than Garrison had imagined. Not the grand mahogany-paneled space from legal dramas, but a simple room with fluorescent lights and worn carpet. Judge Miriam Ashford presided. A woman in her early 60s with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. She'd been on the family court bench for 23 years. She'd seen every variation of human failure, every excuse, every justification, every man who thought his mistakes deserved special consideration. Garrison Holloway would not be special to her. The trial began on a Wednesday morning. Sable sat at the plaintiff's table with Octavia, wearing a navy dress that made her look both professional and vulnerable. She'd brought Lennox, now 6 weeks old. Rena sat in the gallery, ready to take the baby if she fussed. Garrison sat with Preston, wearing his best suit, his hands folded on the table, trying to look like a man who deserved his daughter. "All rise," the bailiff announced. "The Honorable Judge Miriam Ashford presiding." Everyone stood. The judge entered, took her seat, looked over her reading glasses at both parties. "Be seated," she said. Her voice was crisp. "No nonsense. Let's begin. This is a custody hearing regarding the minor child Lennox Winters, born 6 weeks ago to Sable Winters and Garrison Holloway. Miss Brand, you may proceed." Octavia had stood. "Thank you, Your Honor. My client is seeking primary physical custody of Lennox, with supervised visitation for Mr. Holloway. We believe this arrangement is in the best interest of the child given Mr. Holloway's pattern of emotionally abusive behavior during the pregnancy." "That's a serious allegation," Judge Ashford had said. "I assume you have evidence." "Substantial evidence, Your Honor." And so it had begun. Octavia had presented text messages, emails, testimony from Rena about Sable's emotional state during the pregnancy. Medical records showing elevated blood pressure and stress markers after Garrison had demanded the paternity test. My client was subjected to intense psychological distress during a vulnerable time, Octavia had argued. Mr. Holloway accused her of infidelity without any evidence. He demanded she undergo medical testing to prove the child's paternity. This created an environment of fear and anxiety that endangered both my client and her unborn child. "Objection," Preston had said. "There's no evidence that Mr. Holloway's actions endangered anyone." "I beg to differ," Octavia had replied. "We have medical testimony showing Miss Winters' blood pressure spiked dangerously after the confrontation. We have documentation of her emotional distress. And we have Mr. Holloway's own admission that he had no evidence of infidelity when he made his accusation." "Mr. Locke," Judge Ashford had said, "is it true your client had no evidence?" Preston had stood slowly. "My client had concerns, Your Honor. Concerns that were perhaps misguided but not malicious. Concerns based on what?" Judge Ashford had pressed. And that was the moment when Garrison's case began to crumble. Because the truth was humiliating. The truth was that he'd believed his mother over his wife. That he'd let outside influence override his own judgment. That he'd been weak and stupid and cruel. "Mr. Holloway," Judge Ashford had said, "I'm going to ask you directly. What evidence did you have that made you request a paternity test?" Garrison had stood. "Your Honor, he'd faltered. "I didn't have concrete evidence." "Then what did you have?" "My mother suggested that." Garrison had stopped, realized how it sounded, that my wife spent a lot of time alone, that she was friendly with her clients, that the timing of the pregnancy seemed uncertain. "Your mother suggested these things." "Yes, Your Honor." "And you believed your mother over your wife?" Garrison had looked at Sable. She was staring at the table. Her face was carefully blank. "I let doubt override my judgment." "Doubt based on what, Mr. Holloway? I'm trying to understand the reasoning here." "There was no reasoning, Your Honor. I was wrong." "Yes, you were," Judge Ashford had said. "But I need to understand why you were wrong. Because if you can't explain how you arrived at this decision, How can I trust you won't make similar decisions in the future? Decisions that affect your daughter's well-being. Preston had tried to salvage it. Your Honor, my client has acknowledged his mistake. He's taken steps to address the issues. He's cut off contact with his mother. He's committed to co-parenting therapy. Has he taken any parenting classes? Judge Ashford had asked. Not yet, but he's willing to. Has he undergone any psychological evaluation to understand why he made such a destructive choice? Not yet, Your Honor. Then what exactly has he done, besides acknowledge what we all already know, that he was wrong? Silence. Because the answer was nothing. Garrison had done nothing except feel sorry for himself and hope that would be enough. It wasn't. When Sable took the stand, she was devastating. Octavia had walked her through the entire relationship, the beautiful beginning, the slow poisoning by Cordelia. The moment Garrison had placed the DNA test on the counter. How did you feel in that moment? Octavia had asked gently. Sable had taken a breath. I felt like I was being erased, she'd said. Like 6 years of faithfulness meant nothing. Like I was guilty of a crime I didn't commit, and no amount of truth would matter. Because if he could believe I'd betray him that completely, then he never really knew me at all. And how has this affected your relationship with Mr. Holloway? It destroyed it. Completely. I can't look at him without seeing that moment, without feeling that accusation. And I can't trust him. Not with my heart. Not with my life. I can only trust him to be Lennox's father if there are boundaries and supervision. Do you believe Mr. Holloway loves his daughter? I do. Do you believe he would intentionally harm her? Not physically, no. Emotionally. Sable had paused. I believe he's capable of making decisions that prioritize his own fears over her needs, just like he did with me. And until he can prove otherwise, I need to protect her. When Preston had cross-examined Sable, he tried to paint her as vindictive, as a woman using the child to punish her ex-husband. Isn't it true, Miss Winters, that you've refused to allow Mr. Holloway any unsupervised time with Lennox? That's correct. Even though he's her biological father. Being a biological father doesn't make someone a good parent, Sable had replied calmly. It just makes you genetically related. But you're using the child as a weapon, aren't you? To punish Mr. Holloway for his mistake. I'm using my judgment as a mother to protect my child from someone who has demonstrated poor judgment. There's a difference. You changed her last name to Winters instead of Holloway. I did. Isn't that cruel, to deny her father's name? Is it cruel to not want my daughter to carry the name of a man who looked at me, her mother, and saw a liar? I gave her my name because I'm the parent who will be there every day. Not just during supervised visits. Preston had tried several more approaches. All of them failed. Sable was unshakable, clear, reasonable, everything Garrison wasn't. When Garrison took the stand, Octavia destroyed him. Mr. Holloway, why did you request the DNA test? She'd asked. Because I had doubts. Doubts based on what evidence? No concrete evidence. So you had a feeling, my mother suggested. Garrison had started. Ah, yes, your mother. Tell me, Mr. Holloway, does your mother make all your important decisions? No, just the ones that destroy your marriage. Objection, Preston had called. Sustained. But Miss Brand, get to your point. My point, Your Honor, is that Mr. Holloway is a grown man who chose to believe baseless accusations over his wife's word, who chose to demand proof over offering trust, who chose to create trauma during his wife's pregnancy because he couldn't think for himself. That's not fair, Garrison had protested. Isn't it? Let me ask you this. Did you ever see Miss Winters with another man? No. Did you ever find any evidence of infidelity? Messages, photos, anything? No. Did she ever lie to you about her whereabouts? No. Did she ever give you any reason at all, to doubt her faithfulness? Garrison had sat there, silent, because the answer was no. Sable had been perfect, faithful, honest, and he'd destroyed her anyway. The answer is no, isn't it, Mr. Holloway? Yes. So you accused an innocent woman of the worst betrayal imaginable based on absolutely nothing. Is that correct? I was wrong. You were more than wrong. Mr. Holloway, you were cruel, you were abusive, and you demonstrated such profound lack of judgment that my client cannot trust you alone with her child. Our child, Garrison had said. His voice broke. She's my child too. Biologically, yes. The test proved that. Octavia's voice dripped with disdain. But being a father is more than genetics, Mr. Holloway. It's about trust, stability, good judgment. And you've demonstrated none of those qualities. After 2 days of testimony, Judge Ashford had called for closing arguments. Preston had done his best. Talked about Garrison's remorse, his commitment to being a good father, his willingness to do whatever it took to be in Lennox's life. But Octavia had been brutal in her closing. Your Honor, this case is simple. Mr. Holloway made a choice. He chose to believe lies over love. He chose to demand proof over offering faith. And that choice revealed something fundamental about his character. He is not stable. He is not trustworthy. And he is not ready to be an unsupervised parent to a vulnerable infant. My client is not trying to punish him. She's trying to protect her daughter, and she's asking this court to do the same. Judge Ashford had taken a recess, gone to her chambers, returned 30 minutes later with a decision that would define the rest of Garrison's life. I've reviewed all the evidence and testimony, she'd begun, and I've reached a decision. Mr. Holloway, I want to be very clear with you. You did not lose custody because of one mistake. You lost it because you demonstrated a fundamental lack of trust in a person who had earned it. You allowed outside influences to override your own judgment. And in doing so, you created an environment of emotional harm for both Miss Winters and your unborn child. Judge Ashford had looked at him over her glasses. When your daughter is old enough to ask why her parents aren't together, I hope you'll have the courage to tell her the truth. That you destroyed your family because you believed a lie? As for custody, the court awards primary physical custody to Miss Winters. Mr. Holloway will have supervised visitation twice weekly, 2 hours per visit, until the child reaches 18 months of age. At that time, we will reevaluate based on Mr. Holloway's demonstrated growth and the child's needs. Mr. Holloway is also ordered to complete a parenting course, undergo 6 months of individual therapy, and participate in co-parenting counseling with Miss Winters. The marital home will be sold and proceeds divided equally. Mr. Holloway will pay child support in the amount of $2,000 per month and alimony of $1,500 per month for 3 years. Court adjourned. The gavel had come down, and with it, any hope Garrison had of being a full-time father to his daughter. He'd walked out of that courtroom a broken man. Everything he'd built, everything he'd loved, gone. Reduced to 4 hours a week and a list of requirements that felt like punishment. Preston had patted his shoulder. I'm sorry, Garrison. I told you to settle. Garrison had barely heard him. He'd watched Sable gather Lennox, watched Renna put a protective arm around them both, watched his family, the family he'd destroyed, walk out of the courtroom without looking back. And he'd understood something fundamental. This was justice, not the kind he'd hoped for, but the kind he deserved. 3 months after the trial, Garrison had settled into a routine that felt like purgatory. Every Tuesday and Saturday, he drove to the Family Visitation Center on Morrison Street, a squat brick building that smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams. He'd arrive 15 minutes early, sign in at the desk, wait in the lobby with other fathers who'd lost the right to be alone with their children. Some of them were dangerous. You could see it in their eyes, the anger, the resentment, the violence barely contained. But most of them were just sad. Men who'd made mistakes, who'd chosen poorly, who were paying for those choices in 2-hour increments under fluorescent lights. Garrison belonged to the second group, though some days, looking at his reflection in the bathroom mirror, he saw something dangerous too. Not violence, but the kind of desperation that made men do stupid things. The kind that made them show up at their ex-wife's house uninvited. The kind that made them violate court orders and restraining orders and common sense. He understood now why those orders existed. Because love, when it couldn't find a healthy outlet, turned toxic, turned into obsession, turned into something that hurt the very person you were trying to hold on to. So Garrison followed the rules, showed up on time, left on time, never asked Sable for more than the court had given him, because the alternative was losing even the little he had left. The visits with Lennox were simultaneously the best and worst part of his week. She was growing so fast, changing every time he saw her. At 3 months old, she'd started smiling. Real smiles that lit up her whole face. Garrison had been there for her first laugh, a gurgling giggle when he'd made a silly face. He'd cried, right there in the visitation room. And Patrice, the supervisor, had pretended not to notice. But here's what killed him. He was missing everything else. The midnight feedings, the diaper changes, the random Tuesday afternoon when she discovered her toes, the quiet Saturday morning when she slept on someone's chest while they drank coffee and watched the sun rise. Sable got all of that. Sable got the everyday magic, the boring, beautiful, ordinary moments that made up a childhood. Garrison got 4 hours a week in a room that smelled like bleach. He'd completed his parenting class, 12 weeks of learning how to change diapers and soothe a crying baby and understand developmental milestones. He was the only father in a room full of mothers, mostly teenagers, girls who'd gotten pregnant too young and were trying to figure out how to raise a child while still being children themselves. The instructor, a patient woman named Yolanda, had pulled him aside after the 3rd class. "You're different from most of the dads we get here," she'd said. "How so?" "You actually want to learn. Most of them are here because a judge ordered it. They sit in the back and play on their phones. But you take notes. You ask questions. You're trying." "I have to try," Garrison had said. "It's all I have left." The therapy was harder. Dr. Bennett Moss was a clinical psychologist who specialized in helping people understand their self-destructive patterns. He was in his 50s, bald, kind eyes, the sort of person who could sit in silence for 5 minutes without it being awkward. In their first session, Dr. Moss had asked a simple question. "Why are you here?" "Because the court ordered it." "That's why you showed up. But why are you really here? What do you hope to get from this?" "I want to understand why I destroyed my marriage." "Do you? Or do you want me to tell you it wasn't your fault? That you were manipulated? That you're a victim too?" Garrison had bristled. "I know it was my fault." "Do you? Because in the 3 sentences you've spoken, you've blamed the court and mentioned your marriage being destroyed." Passive voice. "Like it happened to you. Not because of you." "That's not fair." "Therapy isn't about fair, Mr. Holloway. It's about truth. So let's start with a truth. You didn't destroy your marriage. You made a choice. A specific choice. And that choice had consequences. Now, if you want to spend our time together feeling sorry for yourself, we can do that, but it won't change anything. If you want to actually grow, to understand yourself, to become someone who doesn't make the same mistakes, then we have work to do. Which one do you want?" Garrison had sat there, feeling exposed, feeling angry, feeling like he wanted to walk out. But he'd stayed, because Dr. Moss was right. Feeling sorry for himself hadn't changed anything, hadn't brought Sable back, hadn't given him more time with Lennox, hadn't undone the damage. "I want to grow," he'd said finally. "Good. Then tell me about your mother." Over the next months, Garrison had excavated his relationship with Cordelia. The ways she'd controlled him since childhood, the impossible standards, the constant criticism disguised as concern, the way she'd undermined every relationship he'd ever had that didn't meet her approval. She told me once that love was a weakness, Garrison had said during their 8th session, that successful people didn't let emotions cloud their judgment. And you believed her. I thought I didn't. I thought I'd rejected her worldview when I married Sable. But I guess, Garrison had paused, I guess I just buried it. And when Sable got pregnant, when things got real and permanent, all that poison came back up. What are you afraid of, Mr. Holloway? The question had hit him like a punch. What? You heard me. What are you actually afraid of? I'm afraid of being alone. Of losing the people I love. Of, Garrison had stopped, felt the truth rising up. Of not being good enough. Not being good enough for whom? For anyone. My mother. My father before he died. Sable. Lennox. And so you sabotaged the relationship before Sable could discover you weren't good enough. You pushed her away first, to protect yourself from the inevitable rejection. That's not what Garrison had started, then stopped. Because it was true. He'd been waiting for Sable to leave him, waiting for her to realize she'd married beneath her. That he was just another rich kid coasting on his family's money and name. That he wasn't special or interesting or worthy of her creativity and light. So when his mother suggested Sable might be unfaithful, some part of him had thought, of course she is. Because why would someone like her stay with someone like me? Oh God, Garrison had whispered. I didn't trust her because I don't trust myself. Now we're getting somewhere, Dr. Moss had said gently. The co-parenting counseling was a special kind of torture. Once a month, Garrison and Sable sat in a small office with a mediator named Claudia Vance. They discussed Lennox's needs, her schedule, her development. Everything except the elephant in the room. The fact that they'd once loved each other, that they'd built a life together, that they'd destroyed it. Sable was always professional, polite, distant. She'd arrive with notes, printouts of Lennox's pediatrician appointments, updates on her sleep schedule and feeding routine. She treated it like a business meeting, which Garrison supposed it was. Lennox is starting to recognize faces, Sable had reported during their 4th session. She smiles when she sees familiar people. I thought you should know, so you can be consistent during your visits. Same clothes, same cologne. It helps her recognize you. Thank you, Garrison had said. Does she, he'd hesitated, does she smile when she sees me? Sometimes. It takes her a few minutes to remember you. But yes, she smiles. Those words had hurt worse than any insult. His daughter had to remember him, had to work to recognize the man who was supposed to be a constant in her life. I wish I could see her more, Garrison had said. That's not what we're here to discuss, Claudia had interjected. We're here to talk about Lennox's current needs, not custody arrangements. That's for the court to decide. When can I request a modification? Garrison had asked. The judge said 18 months. That's 15 months from now. That's 15 more months of supervised visits. Of being a stranger to my own daughter. Sable had looked at him then, really looked at him for the first time in months. If you want more time with her, Garrison, prove you're ready. Not to the court, to me. Show me you've changed, that you've dealt with whatever made you capable of hurting me. Because right now, all I see is the same man, just sadder. I'm trying. Are you, or are you just going through the motions because a judge told you to? Garrison hadn't had an answer, because he didn't know anymore. Was he changing, or just performing change? Was he healing, or just waiting for enough time to pass that people would forget what he'd done? At night, alone in the house that was too big and too empty, Garrison would scroll through photos on his phone, pictures of Sable from before, laughing at a restaurant, painting in her office, sleeping on Sunday morning with lights streaming through the window. He'd kept them all, even though looking at them felt like pressing on a bruise. He'd tried dating once, a setup by a colleague who thought he needed to move on. Her name was Portia. She was pretty, smart, an interior designer with her own firm. They'd met for dinner at an upscale restaurant downtown. "So you're divorced," she'd said over appetizers. "Recently?" "How recently?" "6 months." "That's very recent. Do you have kids?" "A daughter, Lennox. She's 5 months old." "Oh." Portia had smiled, but it was strained. "So you're a new dad and a new divorcee. That's a lot." "It is." "What happened, if you don't mind me asking?" "I ruined it," Garrison had said. "There was no point in lying. I didn't trust my wife. I accused her of something she didn't do, and I destroyed our family." Portia had set down her fork. "That's very honest." "I'm trying to be honest now, since I wasn't before." "Do you still love her, your ex-wife?" "Yes." "Then why are you here with me?" "Because everyone keeps telling me I need to move on, that I can't spend my life waiting for something that's never going to happen, that I need to let go." "But you can't." "No, I can't." Portia had signaled for the check. "I appreciate your honesty, Garrison, but I'm not interested in being someone's rebound, or their second choice, or the person who helps them get over their ex. You need to finish grieving your marriage before you start dating again." She'd been right. Garrison had gone home that night and realized he didn't want to date, didn't want to move on, didn't want to replace Sable with someone new. He wanted to earn his way back, even though he knew it was impossible, even though Sable had made it clear she was done, even though the door was closed and locked and he'd thrown away the key. When Lennox was 6 months old, Sable sent him a video. He'd been at work, in the middle of a design review, when his phone buzzed. The preview showed Lennox sitting up. The subject line said, "Thought you'd want to see this." Garrison had stepped out of the meeting, opened the video, and watched his daughter sit up unsupported for the first time. She wobbled, looked proud of herself, then toppled over sideways onto a pillow and laughed. The video was 14 seconds long. Garrison watched it 30 times in a row. That night, he'd texted Sable. "Thank you for sending that. It meant everything." She'd replied an hour later. "I know you can't be there for the big moments, but I don't want you to miss them completely. I'll send updates when I can." That was kindness, more than he deserved, and it gave him something he hadn't felt in months. Hope. Not hope that they'd get back together, but hope that maybe, eventually, they could be what Lennox needed. Co-parents who didn't hate each other, who could communicate, who could put their daughter first. It wasn't what he wanted, but it was more than he thought he'd get. While Garrison was learning to be a part-time father, Sable was building a whole new life, not just surviving, thriving. Becoming someone stronger than the woman who'd walked out of that hospital room 8 months ago. She'd moved out of Rena's house and into a small cottage in West Ashley. 2 bedrooms, a sun-drenched living room, a garden where she could plant tomatoes like she used to. It wasn't big, but it was hers. No memories of Garrison, no ghosts of the life they'd built together. She'd painted Lennox's nursery a soft sage green, hung paper butterflies from the ceiling, created a space that was peaceful and calm and full of love. Her business was booming. Word had spread about her work. She'd rebranded 3 more startups, designed packaging for a local coffee roaster, created a logo for a nonprofit that went viral on social media. She was making more money than she'd ever made, more than enough to support herself and Lennox without Garrison's child support, though she took it anyway, because he owed them that much. She'd started therapy too, with a trauma specialist named Dr. Shira Lang, a woman who helped her understand what she'd been through, not just the divorce, but years of subtle manipulation from Cordelia, years of having her reality questioned, years of trying to be good enough for a family that would never accept her. "I keep thinking I should have seen it coming," Sable had said during one session. "All the signs were there. Cordelia's comments, Garrison's increasing distance. I just didn't want to believe it. Believing someone you love could hurt you that way, that's not a failure, Dr. Lang had said. That's trust. That's what healthy people do. They trust until they're given a reason not to. But I was given reasons, small ones. I just ignored them. Because you loved him, because you wanted your marriage to work. There's no shame in that, Sable. So why do I feel ashamed? Because he made you doubt yourself. That's what emotional abuse does. It makes you question your own perceptions, your own worth, your own reality. Is that what it was? Abuse. It feels dramatic to call it that. Let me ask you this. Did he make you feel unsafe? Emotionally, yes. Did he make you question your own sanity? Yes. Did he demand you prove something you shouldn't have had to prove? Yes. That's abuse, Sable. It doesn't have to be physical to be real, to be damaging, to require healing. And Sable had cried. Not for the marriage, that grief had passed, but for the woman she'd been, the one who'd believed that loving someone perfectly would be enough. That being faithful and honest and true would protect her from betrayal. She'd learned that wasn't true, that sometimes people hurt you not because of who you are, but because of who they are. And there was freedom in that knowledge. Painful freedom, but freedom nonetheless. Rena had been her rock through everything. Showing up with wine when Sable needed to vent. Babysitting Lennox when Sable had client meetings. Reminding her that she was worthy and strong and capable. You're doing it, Rena had said one evening, watching Sable feed Lennox while simultaneously responding to client emails. You're being a mother and running a business and rebuilding your life. I'm so proud of you. Some days I don't feel strong, Sable had admitted. Some days I feel like I'm barely holding it together. That's every mother, every person. You don't have to be perfect, Sable. You just have to keep going. And she did. She kept going. Some days were harder than others. Like the day she'd driven past the house she'd shared with Garrison and seen the for sale sign. Or the day Lennox had smiled at a stranger in the grocery store and Sable had thought, she smiles at everyone because she doesn't have a father who's consistently present. Or the nights when Lennox wouldn't stop crying and Sable was so exhausted she'd cried too, wishing she had a partner to trade off with. But those moments got fewer. The hard days got easier. And slowly, Sable remembered who she'd been before Garrison. The creative, confident woman who didn't need anyone's approval. Who trusted her own instincts. Who knew her worth. When Lennox was 8 months old, Sable went on her first date. Not because she was ready to move on, but because her college friend, Theo, had been visiting from Atlanta and insisted they get dinner. It's not a date, he'd said. It's two old friends catching up. But it had felt like more. Theo had always had a crush on her, even back in college when she'd been dating other people. And now, sitting across from her at a quiet bistro, he'd looked at her like she was the only person in the room. You look happy, he'd said. Different from when I saw you last year. I am different. I had to be. Tell me about Lennox. And Sable had pulled out her phone, showed him pictures and videos, talked about first smiles and rolling over, and the way Lennox laughed when Sable sang off key. She'd talked for 20 minutes before realizing she'd dominated the conversation. I'm sorry, she'd said. New moms are boring. You're not boring. You're glowing. Theo had reached across the table, touched her hand gently. I'm glad you're happy, Sable. After everything you went through, you deserve happiness. Thank you. Can I ask you something? Sure. Are you open to this? To dating? To meeting someone new? Or are you still, he'd hesitated, still attached to what you had? Sable had thought about it. Honestly, was she still attached to Garrison? To the life they'd built? No, she'd realized. She was attached to the idea of what they could have been. The potential, the possibility, but the actual man. The one who doubted her, who'd believed his mother over his wife. That man she wasn't attached to anymore. "I'm open," she'd said. "But Theo, I have a daughter. I have a business. I have an ex-husband who I have to see twice a month for co-parenting counseling. My life is complicated. Everyone's life is complicated. And I'm not looking for someone to save me. I've already saved myself." "I know. That's what makes you incredible." They dated casually after that. Dinner when Theo was in town, long phone calls, video chats where Lennox would babble in the background and Theo would make her laugh. It wasn't serious, but it was nice. It reminded Sable that she was more than a mother and an ex-wife. She was a woman, capable of being seen and valued and wanted. Garrison had found out through social media. A mutual friend had posted a picture from a birthday party. Sable and Theo, standing close, smiling. Lennox in Sable's arms, looking like a family. Garrison had stared at that picture for an hour, felt jealousy burn through him like acid. That should be me, he'd thought. I should be the one standing next to her, making her smile, holding our daughter. But he wasn't. And he had no one to blame but himself. He'd wanted to text Sable, to ask who Theo was, to demand answers. But he'd stopped himself because he didn't have the right. Sable's life was her own, who she dated, who she introduced to Lennox. That was her decision, not his. Dr. Moss had helped him work through the jealousy in their next session. "You're angry because you lost control," Dr. Moss had said. "You thought if you just did the therapy and the classes and followed the rules, eventually things would go back to how they were. But Sable has moved on." "I know. Do you? Because you're sitting here looking like someone stole your car, like you've been wronged. But Garrison, she didn't wrong you. She's living her life." Which is exactly what you told her to do when you demanded that DNA test. "That's not what I told her." "Wasn't it? You told her you didn't trust her, that you needed proof, that your mother's opinion mattered more than her word. You told her she wasn't enough, so she believed you. And now she's building a life where she is enough, where she doesn't have to prove anything to anyone." Garrison had put his head in his hands. "I've lost her." "Yes, you have. Can I get her back?" Dr. Moss had been quiet for a long moment. "Do you want the comforting lie or the hard truth?" "The truth. The truth is, probably not. The woman you fell in love with doesn't exist anymore. You broke her. And the woman who rose from those pieces is someone different, someone stronger, someone who won't accept being treated the way you treated her. So no, you probably can't get her back, but you can become someone who wouldn't make the same mistakes. Someone who could be a good father to Lennox, a good co-parent to Sable. That's available to you if you're willing to do the work." And Garrison had done the work. Not because he thought it would win Sable back, but because Dr. Moss was right. He owed it to Lennox. To be better. To be someone she could be proud of. At Lennox's first birthday party, Sable had invited Garrison, unsupervised. The first time in a year he'd been allowed around his daughter without someone watching his every move. The party was at Sable's cottage. Small, intimate, just Rena and a few of Sable's friends. And Theo. Garrison had arrived with a giant stuffed giraffe, ridiculously oversized. Lennox could barely see over it, but when she'd spotted him, she'd squealed, reached for him, called him Dada, clear as day. Garrison had picked her up, held her close, felt her tiny arms around his neck, and thought, This is worth everything. Every therapy session, every supervised visit, every moment of humiliation. Because she knows me. She's happy to see me. He'd watched Sable throughout the party, watched her laugh with her friends, watched Theo help her cut the cake, watched the easy affection between them, the way he touched her shoulder, the way she leaned into him. It hurt, but it was a clean hurt, not the festering wound of the past year, just the ache of loss, of knowing what he'd had and thrown away. Near the end of the party, Sable had approached him. They'd stood together, watching Lennox destroy her smash cake with gleeful abandon. "Thank you for coming," Sable had said. "Thank you for inviting me. She loves you, you know. She talks about you, points to your picture. Really, really, you're her dad, Garrison. You always will be. And you are you." Garrison had gestured toward Theo. "Is that serious?" Sable had smiled. "That's none of your business." "Fair enough. But since you asked, it's new. We're taking it slow, because I have a daughter to think about, and I'm not introducing anyone into her life unless I'm sure. He seems like a good guy. He is. He's kind, patient. He doesn't make me prove anything." The words had stung, but Garrison had nodded. "You deserve that. You deserve someone who sees how incredible you are." Sable had looked at him, surprise flickering across her face. "That's the first time you've ever said something like that without making it about you. I'm trying to be better." "I can see that." And Sable had touched his arm briefly. "Keep trying. For Lennox." "I will." 18 months after the trial, Garrison filed a motion to modify custody. His lawyer, a new one named Kendra Bosch, had reviewed his case and been brutally honest. "You've done everything the court asked," she'd said. "Completed parenting classes, finished therapy, attended every co-parenting session. Your supervised visits have gone well. You have a case for unsupervised visitation, maybe even overnights. But Sable can fight it. And if she does, it'll get ugly." "Will she fight it?" "I don't know. What's your relationship like now?" "Better than it was. We're civil. We communicate about Lennox. She invited me to the birthday party." "That's promising. But a birthday party is different from giving you unsupervised time. You need to talk to her first. See if you can reach an agreement without going back to court." So Garrison had asked Sable to meet him for coffee. Just the two of them. No lawyers, no mediators, no Lennox. They'd met at a neutral cafe downtown, sat across from each other in a quiet corner. Sable had aged in the past year and a half, but it looked good on her, like she'd grown into herself. There was a confidence in her posture that hadn't been there before. "Thank you for meeting me," Garrison had started. "What did you want to talk about?" "The custody arrangement. I want to request modification. More time with Lennox. Unsupervised visits. Maybe overnights eventually." Sable had sipped her coffee. I figured this was coming. "Are you going to fight it?" "That depends." "On what?" "On whether you're actually ready. Or whether you're just tired of being supervised." "I'm ready, Sable. I've done the work. I've changed." "Have you?" Sable had leaned forward. "Because here's what I need to know, Garrison. If we have a disagreement about Lennox, about her schedule, or her school, or her health care, are you going to listen to me? Or are you going to run to your mother?" "I haven't spoken to my mother in over a year." "I know, but that doesn't answer my question. If Cordelia showed up tomorrow, apologized, tried to worm her way back into your life, would you let her?" "No." "Why not?" "Because she's poison. Because she destroyed the best thing in my life. Because I finally understand that her love was conditional, controlling, toxic. And mine wasn't." "No, yours wasn't. Yours was real, and I threw it away." Sable had sat back. "You're right. You did. I know I can't fix what I broke between us, but I can be a good father to Lennox. I want the chance to prove that. You've had 18 months of chances, every visit, every counseling session, and you've shown up. You've been consistent. You've learned." Sable had paused. "I'm not going to fight the modification. Really. Really. But I have conditions." "Name them." "First, you continue therapy. Not because the court says so, but because you need it. Because I need to know you're dealing with whatever made you capable of hurting me." "Done." "Second, if you start dating someone seriously, I meet them before they meet Lennox. I need to know who's around my daughter." "That's fair. Third, Sable's voice had hardened. If you ever make Lennox feel like she has to prove herself to you, if you ever question her, doubt her, make her feel less than, I will take you back to court and I will bury you. Do you understand? I understand. Because what you did to me, Garrison, that broke me. But I'm an adult. I survived. But Lennox is innocent, and I will protect her from anyone who makes her feel the way you made me feel. Including you. I would never hurt her. You said you'd never hurt me either, but you did. So forgive me if I don't take your word for it. You have to show me, every day, that you're someone she can trust. I will. I promise. And Sable had looked at him with eyes that had seen too much. Don't make promises, Garrison. Just do better. They'd agreed to a new custody arrangement. Unsupervised visits. 3 afternoons a week. 1 overnight on weekends. Holidays split evenly. It was more than Garrison had dared hope for. The first overnight visit had terrified him. What if Lennox cried for Sable? What if she wouldn't sleep? What if he did something wrong? But Sable had packed a bag with detailed instructions. Lennox's schedule, her favorite foods, the songs she liked before bed, a blanket that smelled like home. You'll be fine, Sable had said, handing over their daughter. She knows you now. She trusts you. And Lennox had. She'd stayed with Garrison overnight, slept in the nursery he'd prepared, woke up happy, ate breakfast with him, played in the garden. It wasn't perfect. There were tears, moments of frustration, a diaper explosion that required an emergency bath. But it was real. It was fatherhood. When Sable came to pick Lennox up the next morning, she'd found them in the kitchen. Garrison was making pancakes. Lennox was in her high chair, covered in mashed banana, laughing hysterically at something. How did it go? Sable had asked. It was perfect, Garrison had said. And then, quietly, thank you for trusting me. Don't make me regret it. I won't. Over the next months, a new normal emerged. Garrison was a part of Lennox's life, not the way he'd hoped when she was born, but present, consistent, loving. He took her to the park, read her stories, taught her to recognize birds in the garden, watched her grow from a baby into a toddler with opinions and preferences and a personality that was equal parts Sable's creativity and his stubbornness. And he watched Sable from a distance, watched her relationship with Theo deepen, watched her thrive in her work, watched her become someone he barely recognized, someone stronger than the woman he'd married. One evening, during a pickup, Theo had been there. He'd shaken Garrison's hand, been polite, kind even. Lennox talks about you all the time, Theo had said. You're her hero. She's mine, Garrison had replied. After they'd left, Garrison had sat in his empty house and understood something fundamental. He'd lost Sable, completely and permanently. There would be no reconciliation, no second chance, no movie ending where she realized she still loved him. That door was closed, and he'd closed it himself. But he had Lennox, and he had the chance to be the father she deserved. That was his second chance, his only chance, and he couldn't waste it. Dr. Moss had helped him grieve the fantasy in their next session. You've been holding on to hope, Dr. Moss had said. Hope that if you just became perfect enough, Sable would take you back. I know she won't. Intellectually, maybe, but emotionally, you're still waiting, still performing, still trying to prove something, and it's exhausting, isn't it? Yes. So let it go. Grieve the marriage you lost. Grieve the life you could have had. Let yourself feel the loss. And then move forward. Not to win her back, but to build a new life. One where you're a good father and a whole person. One where your worth isn't tied to Sable's approval. And Garrison had grieved, really grieved. Not the performative sadness of the past 2 years, but deep, bone-aching grief for the woman he'd loved. For the man he'd been before, he'd destroyed everything. For the family that would never be. He'd cried until there were no tears left, screamed into pillows, punched the heavy bag at his gym until his knuckles bled, let himself feel every ounce of pain and regret and loss. And when it was done, when the grief had run its course, he felt lighter, not happy, but no longer weighted down by false hope, no longer performing recovery, just recovering. At Lennox's second birthday party, Garrison arrived to find something unexpected. Sable and Theo had gotten engaged. The ring was modest but beautiful. Sable glowed with happiness. And when she'd introduced Theo to Lennox as her future stepfather, the little girl had clapped and said, "Tayo!" like she'd been practicing. Garrison had felt the hit, felt the finality. This was real. Sable was moving on, building a new family, and he wasn't part of it. He'd congratulated them both, shaken Theo's hand, hugged Sable carefully, and meant it when he'd said, "I hope you're happy. You deserve happiness." Later, when Sable had walked him to his car, she'd said something that surprised him. "You're different, Garrison. Really different. Not just performing different. I had to be. For Lennox. For myself. I'm glad. Because Sable had looked back at the house where Theo was playing with Lennox. I need to know she has a good father. Someone stable and present and emotionally healthy. And for the first time, I believe that's you. That means everything." "But Garrison," Sable had touched his arm, "you need to build a life too. Not just be Lennox's dad, but be a person, date, make friends, find purpose. Because if you spend the rest of your life punishing yourself for what you did to me, Lennox will see that, and she'll internalize it. I don't know how to move on. The same way I did. One day at a time, you let go of what's gone, and you build something new, something better. Not to replace what you lost, but to honor it. To show that you learned something, that the pain meant something." And Garrison had nodded. Understood. Sable had given him permission to move on. Not from Lennox, but from the guilt, from the endless penance, from the self-imposed prison he'd been living in. It was the kindest thing she'd done for him since the divorce, and he was finally ready to accept it. 5 years after the DNA test that destroyed his life, Garrison Holloway stood in his garden, pushing his daughter on the swing set he'd built last summer. Lennox was 5 years old now, about to start kindergarten. She had Sable's fearlessness and his attention to detail. She built elaborate structures with blocks, asked questions about how things worked, loved butterflies and robots in equal measure. "Higher, Daddy," she squealed. "Push me higher." "You'll fly away," Garrison teased. "I want to fly." He pushed her higher, watched her laugh, felt the simple joy of this moment. This ordinary Saturday afternoon, this slice of fatherhood he'd almost lost completely. His life looked different now than it had 5 years ago. The big house in Mount Pleasant was gone, sold to pay for the divorce and the fresh start. He'd bought a smaller place. A craftsman bungalow with a big backyard. 3 bedrooms, one for him, one for Lennox, one that he'd converted into a home office. He'd left Fleming and Associates 2 years ago, started his own small firm, Holloway Design, specializing in sustainable residential architecture, homes that were beautiful but also responsible. He had 3 employees, enough work to stay busy but not so much that he couldn't take Wednesdays off to pick Lennox up from preschool. His relationship with Lennox was the center of his world. They had their routines, their inside jokes, their traditions. Every other weekend, she stayed with him. They made elaborate breakfasts, went to the children's museum, worked in the garden together. She called him Daddy, ran to him when she saw him, told him about her day in breathless run-on sentences that he cherished. She was his purpose, his redemption, his second chance at being someone good. His relationship with Sable was cordial, professional, sometimes even warm. They texted about Lennox regularly, sent photos and updates, coordinated schedules without lawyers or mediators. They showed up to school events and sat together. They made decisions about Lennox's education and health care as a team. They'd become what Garrison had once thought impossible, good co-parents. Sable had married Theo 3 years ago. A small ceremony on the beach. Lennox had been the flower girl. Garrison hadn't attended, but he'd sent a gift, a painting he'd commissioned of their cottage. Sable had texted a thank you. It was perfect. You didn't have to do that. I wanted to, he'd replied. I want you to be happy. And he'd meant it. Because somewhere in the grief and the therapy and the slow rebuilding of his life, Garrison had learned something crucial. Sable's happiness wasn't a betrayal. It was just happiness. It didn't diminish him. Didn't mean he'd failed. It just meant she'd moved on. Like she should have. Like she deserved to. Theo was a good stepfather, patient with Lennox, kind to Sable. He'd never tried to replace Garrison. Never overstepped. When they occasionally ran into each other at Lennox's events, Theo was friendly, respectful, and Garrison had learned to be grateful for that. Because Theo gave Lennox something Garrison couldn't, a stable 2-parent home most of the time, a model of what healthy love looked like, a man who treated her mother with respect and tenderness. Garrison had started dating again. Nothing serious. A few dinners here and there. A brief relationship with a teacher named Marin that had ended amicably when they'd both realized they wanted different things. He wasn't looking for marriage. Wasn't trying to replace what he'd lost. Just learning to be open to connection again. To trust himself with another person's heart. His relationship with his mother was still severed. Cordelia had tried to reach out a few times over the years. Birthday cards for Lennox that Garrison never delivered. Emails apologizing vaguely for any misunderstanding. Phone calls he didn't answer. Dr. Moss had asked him once if he thought he'd ever reconcile with her. No, Garrison had said without hesitation. Because she's never taken real responsibility. She's never admitted that she deliberately poisoned my marriage. And until she does, there's nothing to reconcile. Can you be at peace with that? Having no relationship with your mother? I have to be. Because the alternative is letting her back in, and she's like a slow leak in a pipe. You don't notice the damage until everything's rotting from the inside. I won't do that to myself again, or to Lennox. And he'd kept that boundary, firm and unyielding, because some people didn't deserve access to your life. Some relationships were toxic, and protecting yourself from toxicity wasn't cruelty. It was survival. On this particular Saturday, after the swing set in the garden and a lunch of grilled cheese cut into triangles, Garrison was driving Lennox back to Sable's house. They were singing along to a kid's song on the radio. Lennox knew all the words. Garrison was making up funny voices. When they pulled up to the cottage, Sable was in the garden, planting something. She waved, walked over to the car. Daddy pushed me so high I almost flew, Lennox announced as she climbed out. Did he now? Sable said, smiling. That sounds dangerous. It was awesome. Go inside and wash your hands, please. Snack is on the counter. Lennox ran inside. Sable turned to Garrison. Thank you for having her this weekend. Always. She's the best part of my life. I know, Sable had smiled. It's good to see. How's Theo? He's good. Working on a project in Colombia. He'll be back tonight. And you? How are you? I'm good, Garrison. Really good. And she was. He could see it. In her easy posture, her genuine smile, the peace in her eyes. She'd built a beautiful life, not despite what he'd done to her, but beyond it. Can I ask you something? Garrison said. It's been 5 years, and I've never, he paused. I've never properly apologized. Not really, I said the words, but I don't think I ever understood what I was apologizing for. Not until recently. Sable had tilted her head. What changed? Lennox asked me yesterday why her last name is different from mine, and I had to explain that you chose to give her your name, and she asked why. And I had to tell her. Garrison's voice cracked slightly. I had to tell her it was because I hurt you so badly you didn't want her to carry my name. And saying that out loud, to our daughter, made me understand what I'd really done. Garrison, I didn't just ask for a DNA test, Sable. I told you that your word meant nothing. That 6 years of faithfulness could be erased by my mother's suspicion. That you were guilty until proven innocent. That's what I did. And I've spent 5 years trying to be better. But I've never said this. I'm sorry for all of it. For every moment of doubt I put in your head. For every night you cried. For making you rebuild yourself from pieces. I'm so deeply sorry. Sable had been quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was soft. I forgave you a long time ago, Garrison. Not because you earned it, but because I couldn't carry that anger anymore. It was too heavy. You didn't have to forgive me. No, I did. For me. But Sable had met his eyes. Forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. It doesn't mean forgetting. It just means I've let go of the poison. I've moved on. I know. And I hope you've moved on too. Really moved on. Not just going through the motions, but building a life that makes you happy. I'm trying. Try harder. Because Lennox is watching, and I don't want her to grow up thinking she has to save her father from his own regrets. Garrison had nodded. You're right. You're absolutely right. As he'd driven away, he'd thought about what Sable had said. About moving on. About building a life. About letting go of regrets. He'd done the work. The therapy. The classes. The supervised visits. The slow rebuilding of trust. But had he built a life? Or had he just built a waiting room? A place to exist until somehow, impossibly, things went back to how they were. That night, alone in his house after Lennox had gone to Sable's, Garrison had pulled out his phone, scrolled through photos, not of Sable, not of the past, but of Lennox, growing up, changing, becoming her own person. In every picture, she was smiling, happy, secure. She had 2 parents who loved her, who showed up for her, who put her first. She had stability, consistency, a model of healthy co-parenting. She was okay. More than okay. She was thriving. And that was because Garrison had done the one thing he should have done from the beginning. Put someone else's needs before his own fear. He'd lost Sable, lost the marriage, lost the life he'd imagined, but he'd saved his relationship with his daughter, and in doing so, he'd saved himself. The lesson had cost him everything, but he'd learned it. Finally. Completely. Trust isn't something you demand. It's something you give. And once broken, it changes shape. Becomes something different. Sometimes it can be rebuilt. Sometimes it can't. But either way, the person who breaks it doesn't get to decide. Sable had decided she couldn't trust him as a husband, but she'd decided she could trust him as a father. And that was a gift. One he'd spend the rest of his life honoring. 2 weeks later, Garrison met someone. Her name was Bellamy. She was a landscape architect. They'd met at a professional conference. She was funny, smart, kind. She had a daughter from a previous relationship, a 7-year-old named Story. They'd gone for coffee, then dinner, then a walk through Hampton Park where they'd talked for 3 hours about everything and nothing. I should tell you up front, Garrison had said as they'd sat on a bench watching the sunset. I have a lot of baggage. I'm divorced. I share custody of my daughter. And I made some really terrible choices that destroyed my marriage. We all have baggage, Bellamy had replied. The question is, have you unpacked it? Or are you still carrying it around? I've unpacked most of it. I'm working on the rest. That's all anyone can ask. They'd started dating, slowly, carefully. Garrison had introduced her to Lennox after 3 months. Sable had met her first, given her approval. Bellamy had been nervous, kind. She'd brought Lennox a book about butterflies. They'd sat on the floor and read it together while Garrison and Sable watched from the kitchen. "She's good with kids," Sable had said quietly. "She has a daughter. Story. She's 7. Are you happy?" Garrison had looked at Sable. Really looked at her. "I think I'm learning how to be. It's different from what I had with you. Quieter, simpler, but it's real. Good. You deserve that. So do you. And you have it." "I do." They'd stood there in comfortable silence. Two people who'd loved each other, who'd hurt each other, who'd survived the wreckage and built separate lives. And for the first time in 5 years, Garrison didn't feel the ache of loss when he looked at her. He felt gratitude for the time they'd had, for the daughter they'd created, for the lessons learned. "Thank you," he'd said. "For what?" "For not giving up on me as a father, even when I deserved it." "I didn't do it for you," Sable had said. "I did it for Lennox." But she had smiled. "I'm glad you became someone worth doing it for." At Lennox's 6th birthday party, both families had been there. Garrison and Bellamy and Story, Sable and Theo, Rena and her new girlfriend. A collection of people who'd come together around one little girl who was loved fiercely by all of them. Garrison had watched Lennox blow out her candles, watched her open presents, watched her hug everyone and laugh and be completely, perfectly happy. This wasn't the life he'd imagined 6 years ago. It wasn't the family he'd thought he'd have. But it was good. Complicated and imperfect and broken in places, but good. And sometimes, good is enough. Sometimes, good is everything. If you've stayed with me through this entire story, I want to say thank you. Because this wasn't an easy story. It was about failure, about consequences, about how one moment of doubt can destroy everything you love. But it was also about growth, about taking responsibility, about learning to be better even when you can't fix what you broke. Here's what I need you to understand. Trust is the foundation of every relationship, marriage, friendship, parenthood. And once you break it, you don't get to decide if it can be repaired. The person you hurt decides that, not you. So if you're in a relationship right now, ask yourself, are you building trust or eroding it? Are you listening to the right voices? Are you choosing love or fear? And if you've already broken trust, are you doing the work to become someone who wouldn't make the same mistake? Or are you just waiting for forgiveness you haven't earned? These are hard questions, but they're important. Because the choices you make today determine the life you live tomorrow. Now, if this story moved you, if it made you think, I need you to do 3 things. First, subscribe to Cedar Drama, because we're telling stories that matter, stories that teach, stories that change how you see the world. Second, hit that like button. It tells me you want more content like this. Third, and this is the most important, comment below, tell me your story. Have you ever been Garrison? Have you ever been Sable? Have you ever had to rebuild after someone broke your trust? Share your truth, because your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And remember, some questions can never be taken back. So choose your words carefully. Choose your doubts carefully, and choose trust whenever you can. I'll see you in the next story. This is Cedar Drama, where every story leaves a mark.